The desperate escape. The twin moons of Vexora hung low in the dark sky, casting a pale glow over the city below. The streets were quiet, almost too quiet. Princess Zyra ran through the narrow alleys, her heart pounding like a war drum. She knew they were close. She could feel their presence, like shadows creeping behind her. Her royal gown, once a symbol of power, was now torn and covered in dust. Blood dripped from a wound on her arm, but she had no time to stop. Her lungs burned as she forced herself to run faster. They'd wanted her dead, and if they caught her, they would succeed. Far above, neon lights flickered on the rooftops. The grand towers of Vexora Prime stood tall, but they meant nothing to her now. The palace, once her home, was where her death had been ordered. She gritted her teeth. I will not die tonight. Suddenly, a sharp whistle cut through the air. Zyra spun around, her violet eyes wide with fear. 3 assassins emerged from the shadows, their faces hidden beneath black masks. Their weapons gleamed under the moonlight, plasma daggers, deadly and precise. One of them stepped forward. His voice was cold and emotionless. There is no escape, princess. Make this easy for yourself. Zyra's mind raced. She had no weapon, no backup. Her only chance was to keep running. Without a word, she turned and sprinted down another alley. The assassins moved fast, their boots barely making the sound. She could hear them closing in. Too fast, too close. Ahead she saw an old cargo bay, rusted doors hanging open. She darted inside, pressing herself against the cold metal wall. Think, think, think. Her breath came in short gasps. Outside, the assassins stopped. She heard them whispering, deciding how to corner her. Then, BM. A gunshot echoed through the alley. Zyra's heart skipped a beat. That wasn't from the assassins. That was something else. Silence followed. The assassins tensed. Then, slowly, heavy footsteps approached from the shadows. A deep voice, rough and calm, broke the silence. Bad night for a hunt, boys. Zyra peeked from behind the metal crates. A tall figure stepped forward, holding a massive plasma rifle in one hand. His black combat suit was battle-worn, scared from past fights, but human. His face was rugged, his sharp blue eyes scanning the assassins like a predator watching prey. One assassin scoffed, "This is none of your business, human. Leave now, and we won't kill you." The man smirked. "You're threatening the wrong guy." Before anyone could react, he lifted his rifle and fired. One shot. A bright blue plasma beam tore through the first assassin's chest. The body hit the ground with a heavy thud. The other 2 assassins rushed forward, their daggers glowing. The human didn't flinch. He ducked under the first attack, grabbed the assassin by the wrist, and twisted. A sickening crack echoed in the night. The assassin screamed as his arm snapped like a twig. The third assassin lunged. The human dodged at the last second, slamming the butt of his rifle into the attacker's skull. The assassin collapsed, unconscious. Zyra watched in stunned silence. She had never seen anyone move like that. Who is this man? The human turned, his gaze locking onto her. Princess, I assume. She hesitated. Who are you? He reloaded his rifle, checking the alley for more threats. Commander Ethan Kane, you can thank me later. Right now, we need to move. Zyra stepped forward. Why did you help me? Ethan gave her a sideways glance. Let's just say I don't like assassins. Before she could ask more, a warning beep came from his wristband. His expression darkened. More are coming. Zyra's pulse quickened. Then we need to leave. Ethan nodded. Follow me. And try not to get shot. Together, they disappeared into the night, with more enemies already on their trail. The human who wouldn't die. The air smelled of burning metal and plasma residue. Smoke curled into the night sky as Ethan Kane led Princess Zyra through the maze of ruined backstreets. His heavy boots crunched against broken glass, but his movements were quick and precise, like a soldier who had done this 1,000 times before. Zaira followed close behind, clutching the wound on her arm. She struggled to keep up with Ethan's long strides, but the pain in her side slowed her down. Ethan noticed. He turned his head slightly, his voice sharp but calm. "Keep moving. We're not safe yet." Zaira gritted her teeth. "I'm trying." Ethan didn't respond. His mind was focused on the scanners in his visor. The assassins weren't far behind. Their heat signatures flickered in his HUD, moving fast, closing in. He muttered a curse under his breath. Not good. They rounded a corner and found themselves at a dead end, an old industrial zone with rusted cargo containers stacked like a maze. The only way out was through the abandoned warehouse ahead. Ethan scanned the area. "We cut through here." Zaira hesitated. What if it's a trap? Ethan glanced at her. "Then we spring it." He pushed open the heavy metal doors, and they slipped inside. The warehouse was massive, filled with towering machines and conveyor belts frozen in time. Old crates and rusted barrels lined the walls. Ethan led Zaira deeper inside, weaving through the shadows. His military instincts kicked in. Check the corners, listen for movement, control the breathing. Then a low hum filled the air. Ethan stopped. His grip tightened around his rifle. That sound. He knew it well. Zaira felt it too. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. "What is that?" Before Ethan could answer, a blue energy field erupted around the warehouse. "A trap." A voice echoed from the darkness. "You should have run while you had the chance, human." From the shadows, a dozen assassins emerged, their plasma daggers humming with lethal energy. Their leader, taller than the rest, stepped forward with a cold smile. Ethan sighed. "I was hoping you'd say something dramatic like that." Then he moved. Faster than Zaira thought possible, Ethan grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and flung it like a spear. It struck one assassin in the chest, sending him crashing into a pile of crates. The others attacked. Plasma bolts flashed. Daggers slashed through the air. Ethan dodged left, sidestepping a blade aimed at his ribs. He countered with a brutal elbow strike, knocking one assassin to the ground. Another came at him. Ethan spun and fired his rifle point blank. A pulse of blue energy tore through the assassin's armor, sending him flying backward. But there were too many. Zaira watched in horror as one assassin lunged from behind, his plasma blade aimed straight for Ethan's back. "Look out!" Ethan turned, but not fast enough. The blade plunged into his side. Zaira gasped as Ethan staggered. Blood dripped from the wound, staining his armor. But instead of falling, Ethan let out a growl, grabbed the assassin by the wrist, and twisted. With a sickening snap, the alien's arm broke. He screamed, but Ethan wasn't done. With one final brutal punch, he sent the assassin crumpling to the floor. Ethan exhaled, his breath ragged. He pressed a hand to his bleeding wound that didn't slow down. Zaira stared in shock. How is he still standing? The assassins hesitated now, their confidence shaken. They had stabbed him. They had outnumbered him. But Ethan Kane refused to die. The leader of the assassins growled. "Impressive, but even you can't fight forever, human." Ethan wiped the blood from his mouth and smirked. "Wanna bet?" The assassins charged again. Zaira clenched her fists. She couldn't just stand there. She grabbed a fallen plasma pistol and fired. Her first shot missed, but the second hit an assassin in the shoulder. Ethan glanced at her, surprised. "Not bad, princess." Together, they fought their way toward the back exit. The assassins weren't expecting resistance. One by one, they fell. The leader snarled, "Kill them both." Zaira fired again, but the plasma cells clicked empty. The leader smirked and raised his blade. "You're out of luck." Then, a deep rumbling shook the ground. Ethan grabbed Zaira and pulled her back just as the ceiling collapsed. A massive cargo crate came crashing down, smashing into the assassins. The dust and debris filled the air. For a moment, There was silence. Then, a groan. The assassin leader was still alive, trapped under the rubble, but alive. He coughed, glaring up at Ethan. "You are not normal." Ethan knelt down, pressing the barrel of his rifle against the assassin's head. His voice was cold. "You're right." Bam! The shot echoed through the warehouse. Ethan stood, gripping his bleeding side. Time to go. Zaira, still in shock, nodded. This man, this human, was something else. She had been raised to believe that humans were weak, fragile creatures. But Ethan Kane had just taken on an army of assassins. And won. She didn't know why he had saved her, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary human, hunted like prey. The warehouse was behind them, but the danger was far from over. Ethan's side burned where the assassin's plasma dagger had stabbed him, but he kept moving. Slowing down meant death. He had fought through worse injuries before. Pain was nothing new. Princess Zaira followed closely, her breathing ragged, her eyes flicking between Ethan and their dark surroundings. The streets of Vexora Prime stretched out before them, silent, empty, but full of unseen threats. The sky was a swirling mix of deep purple and electric blue, neon signs flickering overhead. The city was beautiful, but to Ethan, it was just another battlefield. The human exhaled sharply, pressing a hand against his wound. The bleeding hadn't stopped, and he was losing strength. Zaira noticed. "You're hurt." Ethan didn't look at her. "No kidding. You need medical attention." "What I need," he grunted, pushing forward, "is to get out of this kill box before more of your friends show up." Zaira frowned, her sharp violet eyes scanning the rooftops. The assassins weren't just some rogue mercenaries. They were her own royal guards, which meant they wouldn't stop until she was dead. They ducked into a narrow alleyway, the dim light casting long shadows on the walls. Ethan leaned against the cold metal surface, breathing heavily. "We can't keep running like this." Tyra's voice was low, urgent. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead. Agreed. The sound of distant boots sent a chill down her spine. The assassins were still hunting them. Zaira turned to Ethan. "I know a place, but you won't like it." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "I already don't like it." She ignored him, grabbing his wrist and pulling him forward. The underground. The entrance was hidden beneath an old speeder shop, disguised by a rusted metal hatch. Zaira punched in a code on a small panel, and with a quiet hiss, the hatch unlocked. Ethan eyed it warily. "What is this?" "A safe house. Kind of." "Kind of." He didn't like the sound of that. Zaira climbed down first, and Ethan followed, ignoring the pain in his side. The tunnel below was cramped, damp, and smelled like rust. The glow from the city above faded as they moved deeper. At the end of the passage, they reached a hidden chamber, an old smuggler's hideout filled with crates, spare weapons, and flickering monitors. Zaira moved quickly, grabbing a small medical device from a crate. She knelt beside Ethan, activating the biospray and pressing it against his wound. A soft hissing sound filled the air as the nanotech worked to seal the damage. Ethan tensed. "That stings. Try getting stabbed." Ethan smirked. "I did. Not a fan." She rolled her eyes but kept working. The biospray worked fast, knitting the wound shut within seconds. It wouldn't heal instantly, but at least he wouldn't bleed out. Ethan exhaled, relaxing slightly. "You do this often. Fix up wounded humans." "No. Get betrayed by my own people." "Apparently, yes." Ethan studied her. There was something in her voice, a bitterness, an exhaustion that went beyond just this night. "Why are they after you?" he finally asked. Zaira hesitated. "Because I refuse to die quietly." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That's vague." Zaira sighed, setting the med device aside. She ran a hand through her dark, silken hair. "My father, the Emperor, wants to force me into a marriage with Lord Vasek, one of the most powerful warlords in the sector. He's ruthless, cruel, and twice my age. If I refuse, he will wipe out my people. If I accept, I become a pawn." Her voice hardened. So I ran. Ethan leaned back against the crate, absorbing the information. "And now, they want you dead. Dead is better than defiant." Ethan let out a low whistle. "Your family has a funny way of handling problems." Zyra smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Welcome to Vexoran politics." Silence settled between them. The underground chamber felt smaller, heavier. Then, a faint beeping sound. Ethan's head snapped up. What was that? Zyra frowned. She scanned the monitors. Nothing. Then her eyes widened. "They found us." Ethan grabbed his rifle. "How?" She tapped a small wristband, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. "They must have tracked my royal ID signature. I didn't think they'd have that kind of tech." Ethan cursed. "How much time do we have?" Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she turned toward him, her expression unreadable. "Not enough." A deafening boom shook the chamber. Dust and debris fell from the ceiling. The hatch above them exploded inward as assassins dropped down, their weapons drawn. Ethan reacted first. He fired 2 shots, dropping the first assassin midair. The second landed, rolled, and slashed at him with a plasma blade. Ethan blocked with his rifle, twisting to drive an elbow into the assassin's face. The alien staggered back, and Ethan didn't hesitate. He fired again, point blank. Zyra wasn't idle either. She grabbed a stun baton from the crate and jabbed it into an attacker's ribs. The assassin convulsed before collapsing. More came. 5, 6, 7 of them. Ethan's gun clicked empty. He tossed it aside, drawing a combat knife. The fight turned brutal. Zyra barely dodged a strike, the plasma blade singing the air beside her face. She countered with a precise strike to the assassin's throat. Ethan fought like a demon. His movements were calculated, controlled, years of battlefield experience distilled into deadly precision. He ducked, weaved, countered, every motion a seamless dance of survival. Then, a sharp pain in his back. One of the assassins had struck him from behind. Ethan stumbled forward, vision flickering. Damn. Zyra saw him fall, and something inside her snapped. She grabbed a fallen plasma rifle and fired without hesitation. The assassin who stabbed Ethan collapsed in a heap, smoke rising from his chest. Another moved toward Ethan. Zyra threw herself between them, shielding him. The assassin hesitated. The princess protects a human. Zyra raised her weapon. Run. Now. The assassin didn't move. Neither did she. Then, something unexpected happened. A new voice echoed through the chamber. Cold. Mechanical. Inhuman. Enough. A massive armored figure descended from the hatch above. Zyra's blood ran cold. Lord Vasek, her would-be husband. His crimson battle armor gleamed under the dim light, his 4 glowing eyes locking onto her. "You have made a grave mistake, Kyra." Ethan, still bleeding, looked up at the towering warlord. "I take it that's the fiancé." Zyra's grip tightened on her weapon. "Not if I kill him first." Lord Vasek smiled. And then he lunged. A deadly escape and a heartbreaking choice. The air inside the underground chamber was suffocating, thick with the metallic scent of blood, the tang of burnt plasma, and the ever-present weight of death. The moment Lord Vasek landed, the temperature seemed to drop. Zyra felt her pulse quicken, but she didn't step back. She wouldn't show fear. Not to him. Ethan, still on the ground, forced himself to move. His body screamed in protest, but he wouldn't let himself pass out. Not now. Not yet. Vasek's deep, rumbling voice filled the chamber. "You would rather side with a human, princess, over your own people." Zyra didn't lower her plasma rifle. "My people. Or you." The warlord's smile didn't waver. What's the difference? Ethan coughed, pushing himself up onto one knee. Real charmer, this guy. He spat blood onto the ground. Looking up at Vasek, no wonder she ran. Vasek's 4 glowing eyes turned toward Ethan, scanning him like one would examine a cockroach before stepping on it. Ah, the human who refuses to die. Ethan wiped his mouth, smirking despite the pain. And yet, here I am. Vasek chuckled, not for much longer. With a flick of his wrist, a gravity pulse emitter on Vasek's gauntlet activated. A powerful shockwave erupted from his armor, hurling Ethan backward into a stack of crates. Wood and metal shattered on impact. Zera screamed, turning to fire, but Vasek was faster. With terrifying speed, he closed the distance, grabbing Xyra's rifle and crushing it in his hand like it was made of paper. Sparks flew as the weapon fell apart. Xyra staggered back, but Vasek grabbed her by the wrist, pulling her toward him. His grip was like iron. Enough games, Vasek growled. You are coming with me. Xyra struggled, trying to twist free, but Vasek's strength was inhuman. His massive form towered over her. Then, a gunshot. Vasek jerked slightly, a burning hole now smoldering in his shoulder plate. He turned his head slowly. Ethan stood in the wreckage of broken crates, gun raised, still breathing. Vasek laughed, a deep, hollow sound. You're amusing, human. He flexed his shoulders, the armor already repairing itself. But pointless. Ethan took a slow step forward. He was bleeding, exhausted, and barely standing. But he didn't stop. Vasek tilted his head, intrigued. Tell me, soldier, why do you fight for her? Ethan exhaled sharply, his grip tightening on his pistol. Because I choose to. That was all he said. Xyra felt something tighten in her chest. Why would he throw his life away for her? He had no reason to. But Ethan Kane wasn't a man who needed a reason. He just did the right thing. Vasek sighed, shaking his head. Foolish. Then he moved. With blinding speed, Vasek launched himself at Ethan. The ground cracked beneath his feet from the sheer force. Ethan fired 3 times. 1 shot missed. The second hit Vasek's armor. The third. Vasek was already there. The warlord's massive fist slammed into Ethan's chest, sending him flying. He crashed into the metal wall so hard it dented inward. Xyra's scream echoed through the chamber. Ethan hit the ground, coughing violently. Blood splattered from his mouth as he tried to breathe. His ribs were probably shattered. Vasek turned to Xyra, towering over her. This is what humans are, princess. Weak, fragile, disposable. Xyra's hands shook with rage. Vasek continued. Now, come quietly, or I will rip the life from his body. She had no choice. Her eyes met Ethan's. He shook his head weakly. Don't. Xyra's hands clenched into fists. She couldn't let him die. Not like this. Then, something exploded. The chamber shook violently as an entire section of the underground hideout collapsed. A deafening roar of metal and stone filled the air. Smoke and dust blinded them all. Xyra felt herself being pulled backward. Strong arms wrapped around her, yanking her away from Vasek, just as the ground beneath them gave out. They were falling. The underground hideout collapsed into the tunnels below. Xyra hit the ground hard, gasping as the impact knocked the air from her lungs. For a second, everything was silent. Then she heard a groan beside her. Ethan. He was alive. Barely. Her hands flew to his chest, feeling his wounds. His armor was cracked. Blood stained his entire side. His breathing was slow. Too slow. No, 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 Ethan. Stay with me. Xyra shook him, her heart hammering against her ribs. He blinked up at her, his blue eyes hazy, his lips curled into a weak smirk. Told you not to get caught. Tears burned Xyra's eyes. Shut up. She looked around. The tunnel had caved in, separating them from Vasic. For now, they were safe, but Ethan wouldn't last much longer. Gira made a choice. She activated her emergency beacon. A holographic interface flared to life above her wrist. She keyed in a single message, sending it across the encrypted channel. To the outcasts. Message: the Phoenix is down. Extraction needed. A response came immediately. Hold tight, Princess. Help is coming. She turned back to Ethan, her fingers pressing against his pulse. It was fading. She wouldn't let him die. She wouldn't. She leaned in, her voice trembling. You saved me. Now it's my turn. Somewhere in the darkness, the sound of approaching engines filled the air. Help was coming. But so was Vasic. And this time, she knew. He wouldn't let them escape again. The ultimate sacrifice. The tunnel was collapsing. The air was thick with dust, making it almost impossible to breathe. Cracks ran through the metal walls, and debris rained down like the sky itself was shattering. The only sounds were the distant echoes of war machines moving overhead and the labored, shallow breathing of the man lying beside her. Ethan Kane was dying. Sarah knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed down on his wound. His normally sharp blue eyes were losing focus, his breaths coming in short, uneven gasps. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading over the cracked floor. Stay with me, Ethan. She tried to keep her voice steady, but the fear clawing at her chest was unbearable. Ethan's lips curled into a weak half-smirk. You're crying over me. His voice was barely a whisper. I must be worse off than I thought. Zyra clenched her jaw, forcing back the emotions burning in her throat. You're not dying here. She tore off a piece of her cloak, pressing it harder against his wound. I won't let you. Ethan exhaled, wincing as pain shot through him. You're a terrible liar, Princess. Zyra's vision blurred with tears. Then shut up and let me lie. For the first time, she saw fear flicker in his eyes. Not fear of dying. No, Ethan Kane wasn't afraid of death. But he was afraid for her. He forced himself to sit up, groaning in agony. They're coming. Zyra's head snapped up. Through the cracked tunnel ceiling, she could see movement above. Red lights, the faint hum of grav engines, and the rhythmic stomp of approaching soldiers. Vasic had found them. No, not now. Not like this. Zyra's emergency distress beacon was still active. Help was on the way. But could they hold out long enough? Ethan struggled to lift his rifle, but it slipped from his hands. He let out a rough chuckle. Guess I don't have another fight in me. Zyra grabbed his wrist. Then we run. Ethan shook his head. You run. Zyra's stomach twisted. No, I am not leaving you. Ethan gave her a look, one of quiet acceptance. You don't have a choice, Princess. The ground trembled. The tunnel exploded open, sending metal shards and debris flying. A shockwave threw Exira backward as Vasic's forces descended into the ruins like a swarm of locusts. There was no escape. Vasic landed last, his crimson armor gleaming in the flickering emergency lights. He moved with terrifying ease, as if he was in no rush at all. His 4 glowing eyes swept over the scene, lingering on Exira before settling on Ethan. He sighed. You should have stayed down, human. Ethan, coughing up blood, managed to grin through the pain. You sound disappointed. Vasic's expression darkened. Not at all. It just means I get to finish this personally. He raised his energy spear, the weapon crackling with deadly power. Zyra threw herself between them. Stop, she yelled. Take me. Just let him go. Vasic tilted his head, amused. You care for this creature. Zyra's hands balled into fists. More than I ever did for you. Vasic's amusement faded. His grip tightened on his spear. Then you can watch him die. He thrust the spear forward. Ethan moved first. With his last bit of strength, he grabbed Exira and threw her backward just as Vasic's spear plunged straight into his chest. The world seemed to stop. Zaira's scream tore through the air, but it felt distant, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Ethan staggered, impaled by the crackling weapon, but he didn't fall. He gripped the shaft of the spear with both hands, keeping Vasek from twisting it deeper. He was still fighting. Vasek's eyes narrowed. "You are resilient." Ethan coughed, blood staining his teeth, but he smirked through the pain. "And you talk too much." Then, he activated the plasma charge hidden in his armor. The explosion was instant. A shockwave of blue energy erupted from Ethan's chest, knocking Vasek backward. The spear was still lodged in Ethan, but the force had damaged Vasek's armor, causing sparks and smoke to rise from his body. Vasek snarled in frustration, "You reckless." But Ethan wasn't done. With an inhuman effort, he grabbed Vasek by the arm, pulling him in close. He grinned one last time. Boom. He pressed the final detonator. The chamber erupted in fire and chaos. Zaira was flung backward by the force of the explosion, slamming into the ground. Her vision blurred, her ears rang, and the heat from the blast burned her skin. She barely registered the fact that Ethan was gone. Smoke filled the air. The cavern was caving in. Vasek's forces were scattered, some dead, some retreating. Through the chaos, a voice crackled over her wrist communicator. "Princess, we've locked onto your signal. Sending extraction now." But Zaira didn't move. Her whole body trembled as she crawled toward the spot where Ethan had been. Nothing was left but scorched rock and shattered metal. No body, no trace, only silence. Tears blurred her vision, but she didn't wipe them away. He was gone. And yet, somewhere in the back of her mind, something whispered, it wasn't supposed to end like this. A final message. Hours later, aboard a hidden rebel ship, Zaira sat alone in the dimly lit chamber. The medics had patched her up, but she felt nothing. Her wrist communicator flashed. A priority message. She hesitated before opening it. A holographic recording appeared. Ethan Kane. Her breath caught in her throat. He looked battered, tired, but alive. The message had been recorded before their final fight. "If you're seeing this, Princess, either I'm dead or you just like watching my face too much." He smirked slightly. "Let's assume it's the first one." Zaira let out a broken laugh. "You better not waste this. I didn't take a spear to the chest just so you could mope around." His expression turned serious. "Go back. Take your throne. Win this fight. And if I'm really gone, avenge me." The recording ended. Zaira sat there, staring at the empty space where his image had been. Her hands clenched into fists. Vasek wasn't dead, but soon he would be. And she would make sure Ethan Kane was never forgotten. The princess returns the favor. Zaira stood at the edge of the observation deck, staring out into the endless void of space. The stars outside should have felt comforting, constant, unwavering, untouched by the wars of men and aliens alike. But tonight, they felt distant. Like him, her fingers clenched into fists. Ethan Kane was gone. Her mind kept replaying the moment. His smirk, his last words, the explosion that had taken him. It didn't matter that Vasek had barely survived the blast. It didn't matter that she had escaped with the help of the outcasts, the very rebels who had been waiting for her signal. Nothing mattered. Not without him. The door behind her slid open with a quiet hiss. Captain Rylos, the leader of the outcasts, stepped inside. His reptilian features were unreadable, but his deep voice was softer than usual. "Princess." Zaira turned slightly, her face emotionless. "Is it done?" Rylos hesitated. "Vasek is retreating back to Vexora Prime to recover. He was injured in the explosion, but..." He exhaled. He survived. Zaira's jaw tightened. Vasek had taken everything from her, and now he still lived. Rylos continued. "The Empire believes you're dead. They won't be looking for you." Zaira barely reacted. Let them think that. She turned back to the window, her voice colder than steel. We take the fight to them. Rylos studied her. Are you sure? Her violet eyes burned with a new kind of fire. I'm done running. The rise of the rebel queen. Over the next 3 months, the universe whispered the name of a new leader. Syra the Defiant, the rebel queen, the princess who would not die. The outcasts had grown into a full-scale rebellion, and Syra led them with a ruthlessness even her father had never possessed. They took planet after planet, system after system, striking against Vasic's forces with precision. Syra led the charge herself, fighting on the front lines, just as Ethan would have. Her name became a legend, a warning, and finally, after months of war, she received the message she had been waiting for. Vasic was making his last stand on the icy moon of Draco's V. It would end there, one way or another. The last battle. Draco's V was a frozen wasteland, its sky choked with warships locked in deadly combat. Fire and plasma rained from the heavens as Syra's fleet descended like vengeance itself. Syra led the assault. Her royal battle armor gleamed under the frost-bitten light, her plasma blades humming with energy. She was no longer the helpless princess running for her life. She was here to finish this. Vasic waited inside his war fortress, surrounded by his remaining elite forces. He stood as she entered, his crimson armor repaired, his 4 glowing eyes locking onto her. He smirked. I wondered when you'd come. Syra charge. The battle was fierce, brutal. Vasic was stronger, but Syra was faster, smarter, and fueled by something far greater than power. She fought with rage, with grief, with vengeance. For Ethan, their battle raged through the halls of the fortress, metal walls splitting under the force of their strikes. And then she saw her opening. Vasic lunged. She sidestepped, twisting her plasma blade upward. The blade sank deep into his chest. Vasic gasped, his 4 eyes wide in shock. He hadn't expected to lose. Syra leaned in, her voice a whisper. This is for him. Then she drove the blade deeper. Vasic let out a choked growl before collapsing. It was over. Syra stepped back, watching as Vasic's massive form fell to the ground. His armor flickered, his strength fading. The warlord of Vexora was dead, and Ethan Kane's death had been avenged. A ghost in the darkness. As Tyra stood over Vasic's body, her heart pounding, her communicator crackled to life. Princess, you need to hear this. Syra's brow furrowed. What is it? A pause. Then, static. A weak, distorted signal. But it wasn't just any signal. It was Ethan's voice. If you're hearing this, I need help. Syra's blood froze. The transmission was weak, broken, full of interference. Impossible. Ethan Kane was dead. She had seen it. She had felt it. And yet, Syra, if you're out there, I don't know how long I can hold on. Her breath hitched. Her hands shook. Her heart roared to life. He was alive. The search begins. The fleet's sensors triangulated the source of the distress beacon. It was coming from the outer reaches, beyond charted space, beyond any known systems. No one went out there. But Syra didn't hesitate. She boarded her fastest ship, the Shadowborn, and set a course. She had spent months fighting for revenge. Now she would fight for him. The unbelievable reward. Lost in the void. Hyperspace twisted around the Shadowborn, stretching the stars into long, glowing ribbons. Syra stood at the command deck, her fingers clenched against the cold metal railing. Every second felt like an eternity. Ethan Kane was alive. That single fact defied everything she had believed. The distress beacon had come from the outer reaches, a place where few had ever returned from. Even the most advanced scanners couldn't map it properly. A swirling abyss of dead systems, abandoned stations, and rumors of things that were better left undisturbed. But she didn't care. She had faced assassins, an empire, and an entire war. She would not stop now. Rylos stood beside her, tail flicking. "Princess, we may not get another chance to turn back." Zyra didn't look at him. "I won't turn back." The reptilian captain sighed, muttering something in his own language before nodding to the pilot. Dropping out of hyperspace in 5, 4, 3, 2. The ship lurched as it tore back into real space. The stars realigned, and a massive derelict station loomed ahead, half destroyed, floating between the shattered remains of a broken moon. Zyra's heart tightened. This was where the signal was coming from. Rylos narrowed his eyes. "That place is ancient. It shouldn't even be operational." Zyra activated her comms. "Ethan, if you can hear me, say something." Silence. Then, static, faint, crackling interference before a voice barely whispered through. "I knew you'd come." Zyra felt her breath catch. It was him. She slammed the comms panel. "Hold on. We're coming to get you." The ship's docking bay doors opened, and a strike team rushed to prepare for entry. Zyra grabbed her own weapons, but deep down, she didn't feel fear, only something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in months. Hope. The price of survival. The station was deathly silent when they entered. It had been abandoned for decades. Flickering emergency lights cast eerie shadows over the rusted metal corridors. Debris floated in the low gravity, and the walls were scarred with burn marks and clawed indentations. Something had happened here. Rylos lifted his rifle. "This place isn't empty." Zyra's gut told her the same thing. The distress signal had come from deep within the station, far below the docking bay. If Ethan was still here, he had survived in this place alone for months. The thought made her stomach twist. They moved cautiously, scanning every corridor, checking for any signs of movement. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Then they heard it. A faint thump, then another. A slow, rhythmic pattern, like a heartbeat. Zyra turned a corner and froze. Ahead, lying against a bulkhead, barely breathing, was Ethan Kane. Her legs nearly gave out. He was alive, but he wasn't the same. His armor was in tatters, cracked open in places to reveal the deep cybernetic implants now fused with his body. His right eye was replaced with an artificial lens, glowing faintly. His left arm, now mechanical, twitched slightly as he tried to move. But the worst was his expression. He looked at her like a man who had walked through hell and didn't know if he was dreaming. "Princess." His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in weeks. Zyra ran to him. She fell to her knees beside him, hands hovering over his chest, unsure if she could touch him without breaking him further. "It's me," she whispered. "I'm here." Ethan let out a weak laugh, his lips curling into that same smirk she thought she'd never see again. "Took you long enough." Tears burned behind her eyes. Rylos and the soldiers stood back, watching silently. Zyra swallowed hard. "We're getting you out of here." Ethan's half-metal fingers reached up, brushing against her arm. I didn't think I'd see you again." Zyra's throat tightened. "Me neither." Then his expression darkened. "We need to leave. Now." A haunting escape. The floor beneath them rumbled. A deep, inhuman growl vibrated through the station walls. Zyra's heart pounded. What was that? Ethan gritted his teeth. "The reason I'm still alive." From the darkness, something moved. Metal screeched as the shadows themselves began to shift, forming grotesque, twisted shapes. Half machine, half organic creatures, crawling on all fours. Their eyes glowed like molten steel, their bodies pulsing with alien tech that didn't belong to this universe. One of them spoke, a voice like shattered glass and dying stars. "He belongs to us now." Zyra grabbed Ethan and hauled him up. "No, he doesn't." She turned to Rylos. "We're leaving. Now." The creatures lunged. The team opened fire. The station shook violently, as if the very walls were alive, trying to hold them in. They ran. Zyra's heart hammered as she half-dragged, half-carried Ethan through the corridors. The beasts followed, screaming in rage, their clawed limbs scraping against metal. The docking bay came into view. GTDE ship all in the line. Rylos roared into his communicator. They barely made it. The moment they crossed into the airlock, the doors slammed shut behind them, sealing the nightmare away. The ship launched into space, engines roaring as the derelict station collapsed in on itself, vanishing into the void. The creatures were gone, and Ethan Kane was finally free. The unbelievable reward. Zyra sat beside Ethan in the med bay, watching as the healing pod worked to stabilize him. His cybernetic parts flickered slightly, adjusting to his new reality. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, he smirked. "So, does this mean I get a medal?" Zyra let out a breathless laugh. Then, before she could overthink it, she leaned in and kissed him. It was brief, barely a whisper of contact, but it said everything. Ethan blinked. "Okay, I like this reward better." Zyra rolled her eyes, but her smile didn't fade. "Get some rest, Kane." Ethan sighed, closing his eyes. "Fine, but wake me up when we take down your father." Zyra's gaze darkened, determination settling in. "Oh, I will. Because this wasn't the end. This was only the beginning."